Hi, and welcome to the third part in our series of Alberta's real estate history, a presentation by myself, Randy Bett, a local Calgary investment realtor and author. In this section, what we're going to be taking a look at is the Great Depression and World War II. The Great Depression began, obviously, at the fall of the stock market in late 1929 and into the 1930s. And the Depression, Alberta suffered like the rest of North America. However, it was foreshadowed by numerous challenges in the 1920s. And in the 1920s, even though land was still readily available, the real estate market had stagnated. The cities and towns had difficulties delivering utilities. There was minimal property development in the area, and several real estate firms actually closed down, and the population barely grew. In Edmonton at that time, there were a few major real estate developments. In the 1920s, even though there was slow population growth and slow residential market growth, there was the opening of the zoo, the library, and an airport. The airport was built in 1927 at the Blatchard Field. At the same time, in 1929, as the stock market was taken off, Edmonton's economy turned around. There was a big increase in real estate sales, and at the same time in 1926, the Edmonton Real Estate Association held their first meeting. Meanwhile, in Calgary, the 1920s saw Calgary devastated by a severe drought, and farms and industries were struggling to survive. Prices in the real estate market went down. However, at the same time, Calgary did have an increase in population. However, those people were mostly homeless and unemployed. Hence, the demand for houses was still low. That changed with the development of the oil industry and as the economy picked up in the late 1920s. In the 1920s, the real estate market was hit by the Great Depression, just as was every other segment of the community. Farmers fled the fields to try to find work in the cities, and in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, their agricultural societies struggled to make a go of it. Meanwhile, with the homelessness and the unemployed, real estate construction ground to a halt. In Edmonton, the homeless took to digging out caves, and in Calgary, permits were given to people to live in tent cities, and many historical mansions were even torn down during that period of time. In the mid to late 1930s, the impact of the Great Depression began to subside as credit was introduced as a means to stimulate the economy. And at that time, the Edmonton airports and theaters were renovated, and the Hudson Bay Company began to build its own stores. In 1939, the Second World War, besides bringing catastrophe to the European market, brought to Alberta employment opportunities and a boost to the real estate market as there was a demand for war materials. GWG, or the Great Western Garment Company, the aircraft repair company in Edmonton, and in Calgary there was two barracks, the Currie and Harvey Barracks, and many military personnel began settling in Calgary and also in Edmonton. At the same time, small-town Alberta prospered. The British Commonwealth began an air training program located in rural Alberta. Several jobs were created, and commercial establishments were opened to service the new employees and the new trainees, such as bars and dance halls and so on. At the same time, the Veterans Land Act was passed. And during that time, real estate in Alberta prospered. Rental boards were established at the same time to limit the growth in rental rates. And in the veterans themselves were able to get land for themselves or for homes. And as far as organized real estate, the Alberta Real Estate Association was formed in 1940, followed by the Calgary Real Estate Board and the Canadian Real Estate Association in 1943. So during the Great Depression and the Second World War, the population growth brought housing shortage and homelessness. The building materials were rationed, and in 1943, the housing shortage forced soldiers to get their accommodations in hotels or sleep in hallways. And in Calgary, the housing shortage, families were evicted and left in the streets, and the homeless moved to other cities. And that ends this particular video series, brought to you by Randy Bett of Better Group Real Estate. The material for this video series was provided by the Heritage Community Foundation.